All right. Hello, everyone. I think we're up and running. So, welcome to the third webinar. I'll be taking you through the technology stack today. So, the title here is Making Technology Decisions in E-commerce. I'll take it step by step, so feel free to ask questions. And as always, we'll share the video later, including the slides as well, so you don't have to take notes for that. So first, quick introduction about Conway, who we are and what we do. Conway & Co is a boutique consultancy of experts in digital commerce. So we help companies that are either offline or online first, and specifically in the consumer retail business. And we help them with independent advice, but also with building their technology stack. And that's also where we're going to share a lot of learnings today as well. So from here, I think it's important to point out is that we look at a company basically as a functioning system. So the technology serves as a backbone or the infrastructure of that business. And what we often encounter is that we see a very messy setup, right? So where there's all these different things flying around, there's unclear responsibilities. Some freelancer made something, some custom code. It's mayhem, to be honest. And often what we help them with is to refine this into processes, and then also to help select the correct software. And that's what we call a technology stack. So technology stack is basically the sum of all your software. Our experience is in consumer retail itself as well. So what we call omni-channel players like Ace and Tate, which is an online eyewear brand. Suit Supply is a company that makes suits. And we experience a lot of the challenges that we'll tell you about today ourselves as well as being digital executives. This is me and my partner, Martin. So I'm more on the CPO side in terms of software engineering, and Martin is a real CTO, so a lot more technical than me. And in this way, we focus on strategy, technology, and analytics in our daily practices with Conway. I think our main promise is good to point out is that we mainly get companies fit for digital growth, and it has multiple components. We always work from an operating model that I'll also show you in a bit. But I think that's the core thing that we're after. So to help the companies get digitally fit and then deliver on their growth ambitions. Just 3 examples. Lekker Bikes is a local e-bike brand. They make and sell their own bikes via their own channels. Same goes for Pink Jellock. They sell nail polish, but also in a very interesting integrated way. So with their website, via marketplaces, but also with their own retail stores. And this way they can really control the omni-channel customer experience, which is a great way to approach it. Last one is Bolt King, similar, started online, but now also are expanding into wholesale. So a very interesting case as well. All right, over to the webinar today. I think my goal here is to basically provide you with a blueprint that will enable you to grow through a few consecutive phases. And I'll explain a bit further what I mean by that as well. What I hope you will learn from this is that you will be able to select the right software in your technology stack, potentially also to lower the business complexity and therefore keep the technology stack simpler as well, to get a bit of a grip on the total cost of ownership of the whole stack. And also to define a few architectural principles for decision making. And then also how to make buy or build decisions, which is very important when compiling your stack. And then lastly is also to focus on with all the different systems within your stack, you actually want to get data-driven or actionable insights from that. And that's also something we'll spend some time on. From here, yeah, as already mentioned, I think one of the core ideas in our philosophy is to work from an operating model. The reason to do that is that it basically defines how a company works for everybody within, but also external people from that company. And if you have good alignment on how the company actually works, that really helps in scaling up and limiting that business complexity I just mentioned. In the last webinar, we discussed the growth engine. So basically how to set up a structure to set up structure for long-term growth that was mainly geared towards the data and actual execution of it. Our goal today is basically to explain how to set up your technology stack to build that, to provide the tools to build that growth engine. A growth engine, as I already mentioned, it's basically a mechanism to achieve sustainable growth. And a way to visualize that is basically like the R funnel, right? So from the left hand, you bring customers in. And then with the right technology, you're also able to refine and send automatic life cycles to these customers. So that's sort of the dynamics and the strategy and tactics around that are discussed in the second webinar. And today we'll focus on how to actually build the technology stack and all the tools that you need to deliver on that digital success. So if the goal from the commercial teams is to build a growth engine, the technology stack will help enable you to do so, to deliver on those growth ambitions. So in that sense, to summarize, technology provides the tools to deliver on the growth ambition across the multiple phases I will go through now. The phases of growth, I think an important way to look at it, and that's why we always work with this operating model methodology, and they help you to limit the complexity and to align the rest of your teams. Stuff will always go wrong, but this is a great tool to help in this scaling up phase. So if you look at the specific 5 phases that have been well researched, not something that we did ourselves, Harvard Business Review has a very classic article on this, which I'll discuss with you in a bit. So how does a company actually grow? This article defines 5 different stages or phases. So it starts where creativity is very important, then it moves into direction, to delegation, to coordination, and then further into collaboration. And within these consecutive phases, they are sort of what they call a valley of death. So there's a lot of companies that don't make it to the other side of the valley, and therefore they don't make it to the next phase. And you'll see that in a number that I'll give you in a bit as well, because these stages, they also correlate to the complexity, and they also correlate to the amount of revenue that's actually there. And this article also explains how that actually affects your organization. So how does it affect your management style, your way to organize your companies or your organizational chart, the extent of specific formal systems. So when you're smaller in stage 1, just existence, it's basically the business owner running and owning the full business. And then step by step, you basically delegate more. And in that way, it becomes less dependent on the actual business owner, and more responsibilities transition to the people in the organization. One thing that we really find that has been missing in this research is the role of technology. So we really feel that the technology stack plays an essential role in this. And that's also what you saw in this last slide. So what the research also says, 3 fundamental barriers are the capable leadership, so the people that are in the management or leadership team, to define a predictable marketing funnel. So that's geared towards a growth engine. So how do you actually bring customers in and how do you keep them in? And they also mentioned you need a scalable infrastructure, but what that actually means and how do you do that, that's not really explained. So that's what this webinar focuses on, and this is what we implement for a lot of our clients as well. The technology stack provides the infrastructure for your growth ambitions. So that's why I mentioned it needs to be in this chart as well. Actually, I would want to insert it as an extra line here. If you compile that into a table, there's another interesting piece of research from the NRF, the National Retail Foundation. They found that software-driven companies, so not software companies itself, but software-driven, as in they use software to sell other things, like e-commerce companies, they spend on average 3.3% of their total revenue on technology, so to build that scalable infrastructure. And when that technology stack is managed well, when you're smaller, it's a bigger percentage of your revenue, but the further you are, the further you grow, it actually decreases. So because that's a part where the scalability from the technology comes from. Another important part, which is a pretty insane metric if you ask me, this connects to these phases or these stages, right? So phases number 1, only 4%, so 96% of companies don't make it through that first phase. So from 0 to 1 million in revenue. And what I try to do here as well is to sort of connect that to the technology stack. So that first phase, in general, it's just smaller home-based businesses without any dedicated or specialist technology or IT people. They just have 3 to 5 systems that work a bit in parallel, but not really are connected in a way. Therefore, they lose a lot of insights. Data gets lost. That's often the phase where that's in. Then when they transition into that second phase, so between 1 and 10 million, I would say that's when it's needed. You actually need to bring what we call a digital leader on board. So either an e-commerce manager, a head of digital, a product owner, someone that is in the leadership position that actually can bring all this software together, so all the tools that they need, and build that growth engine from the second webinar. So that would be sort of the first technology stack with around, let's say, 10 systems. And you already see what's happening is that the percentage of revenue that actually needs to be spent on technology, and that's also why it's so hard to transition through that first phase. It requires quite a lot of investment. because basically your technology expenditure is too large for the amount of revenue that you have. So it's hard to take into that investment, and therefore that's often where a lot of investors are involved as well. Then phase three is mainly where we focus on with many of our clients. Phase three, 4, and 5 is where the majority of our clients are. So when the company becomes more digitally mature, they've transitioned a few of these phases. At the high level, they figured out how to build the business, how this growth engine and bringing people in works. And then they get into a lot of other difficulties with their technology stack. So the software that the technology stack provides doesn't do for the teams what they needed to do. So then often you get a dedicated team, either in-house or outsourced, of specialists to own the technology stack and actually further develop it. All right, so this continued growth through these phases brings more business complexity. And what we mean by business complexity is what I'll explain in the next section. And to some extent, it's sort of the enemy of the technology stack, right? So more business complexity requires more technical flexibility when scaling up, and that is sort of the balancing game that you need to work with. So business complexity, how to balance the business requirements and the technical flexibility. Interesting thing is that Conway's law is not something that we came up with. It is something that our company was named after. So Melvin Conway is a famous computer scientist, and somewhere in the 60s, I think he said the following statement: any organization that designs a system will produce a design whose structure is a copy of the organization's communication structure. For me, still a bit complex. So what he basically means by that is that the structure of the software will mirror the structure of the organization that built it. Why is this important? To make it very simple, if your organizational and your communicational structure is a mess, your technology stack will also be a mess. Being in a leadership position for quite a few years, I'm sort of settling on the idea that IT always gets the blame, right? It's always this shitty software system that's not working. But often the problem is not in the software system. It's either in the processes or in the people that need to use it. So therefore, the goal or the principle almost is keeping your business simple also keeps your technology stack simple. What are the things that drive this business complexity? These are all the things that you need when growing the business. So when you grow the business, you're probably going to sell across more channels. You're going to sell more products. You're going to sell to more types of customers. You're going to change your operating model because you want to expand into different countries. You're going to add new processes in terms of inventory management. There's all these new things that you're going to be doing, and all these new things, they drive complexity. So if you look at the channels itself, that's just as an example. The channels define where you sell. So the more channels, the more complexity. And a digital commerce company doesn't just sell on the web. They sell omni-channel, as they call it. So they also sell via their own retail stores. They sell via marketplaces. So far, we identified 23 different channels. If you want to learn more about this, you can watch our first webinar. It's about omni-channel strategy. This channel mix is very important because your technology stack needs to enable you to sell across all the different channels. And all these different channels are always constantly changing. So you might start on the web, but at some stage you want to add marketplaces. You might even want to start your own store, or the other way around. So you start with your own store and you want to start selling on the web. This is constantly in flux. And the technology stack is there to provide you with the flexibility, so the technical flexibility to do that. To further refine that, and I'll share these slides later, we mapped out all the different components that drive that complexity. And many of these are already mentioned, right? So for example, internationalization. If you sell across more countries or more continents, that also means more languages, it means more currencies, more payment methods. If you sell across multiple countries, that also means more different types of warehouses, for example. So there's all these different things that drive more complexity, and therefore they end up as more business requirements to your technology stack. So I think an important principle to keep in mind is first simplify the processes to the extent that you can, and then start value that over implementing the complexity that you have in your business into your technology stack. And again, technology always gets the blame, but often the benefit is in simplifying processes. So, and I'll explain that further as well. There's basically two ways to approach it. You either if you buy software, you need to adopt the process. If you build software, you can dictate the process. But that helps to first say, okay, where can we simplify? And let's first understand how our business actually works. So to define that operating model, in all the different business processes. All right, then over to the technology stack. So we covered the business complexity, we covered the growth phases that a company goes through. Now the question is how to actually turn the technology into an enabler and not into a blocker of your growth ambition. And as I already mentioned, we look at a company as a system. So all a company is basically a group of people in pursuit of a shared mission. That's often the goal of the leadership team, to define that vision and the mission for the company. And that mission is then supported by technology to execute those business processes. So to enable the company to deliver value to its customers. And the technology stack, all the software systems are in there, they basically provide the tools for the people in your company, for the teams to do the work. And that's also where Conway's law comes in, right? So in essence, technology by itself doesn't have the value. The value of technology comes from the business impact or the business value it provides. So that's why we often start with what are the teams within an e-commerce company. This is in general a mapping of how many e-commerce companies look like, and technology provides all these teams with the right tools to do their work. And if the technology stack is integrated well, it basically provides the rails to your customer journey, and you can see the customer journey in these consecutive teams. So, and I'll show you in the next slide, is that the layers in your technology stack need to be connected to these different teams. So often it first starts with the marketing team. They raise awareness, they try to bring customers in. Then the sales team sells actual things to those customers. Then the operations team makes sure that these orders actually get fulfilled as well. If something goes wrong, you end up with the service team. So then they provide you with insight into where the package is, for example, or something you want to return. The software engineering team makes sure that all these different systems in your technology stack keep up and running, and that they are continuously further developed in line with your expansion plans, right? So opening up a new country basically means new software requirements. And then often two teams that are outsourced is either the fulfillment team that is working in your warehouse, and then also the logistics team that actually does the last mile, right? So that brings the parcel from the warehouse to the customer's house. And then you have a few what we call supporting teams, like the management team, the business intelligence team, human resources. They're not in the direct customer journey, but they are there to support the teams that are in the customer journey to run the company in the best way. Then if you look at the actual backbone or the infrastructure, as I mentioned a couple of times, it will enable you to do that growth, to deliver on those growth ambitions. If it doesn't, it turns into a blocker. And that's often where we get involved, right? So a company has a big growth ambition, an investor just came on board, and they want to make a switch from offline to online. These are all triggers where the technology stack becomes a blocker. But also if you want to roll out those expansion plans, right? So if you want to open up a new country, that requires new software. If you want to sell across a new channel, it requires new software. And these are all business requirements that end up at the technology stack. If you want to expand your catalog, same story. So that's why we connect the organizational structure, as Conway's law says, to the specific layers in your technology stack. And I'll go into that a bit further now. So what is a technology stack? It's basically the sum of all your software. And these the sum of all your software, and the best definition for a technology stack is not just defined by the most fancy software. It has a lot of other elements that define that as well. So as I already mentioned, the business complexity is important one. So is there a way to limit that a little bit? Then you require less or maybe cheaper software in a way, or no custom software. Therefore, the revenue size of the business, this correlates to the phases that I just mentioned, right? So if the company is bigger, then you can spend more on technology as well. The future ambition. So if there's a very big future ambition, you might want to pre-invest a little bit and take a bit of a loss, and then later you earn that back. That is a decision to be made by the leadership team. Very important one as well is that sometimes the digital maturity of the company is just not there yet. And then our advice is often not to go with too much fancy technology, but first ramp up the maturity of the team and then invest in more sophisticated technology, not the other way around, because otherwise you will have a racing car driver with a Ferrari on the track, but they basically don't know how to operate it. So that's not going to help you either. Budget I already mentioned. And then also currently Unfortunately, we often don't start with a clean slate of paper. So there's always current systems in the stack that need to be dealt with, either need to be migrated or the data needs to be extracted or whatever, but it is a factor to make a decision on as well. All right, then if you categorize these three different things, there are three categories of software, right? So the technology stack is the one that I just mentioned, and an example system that is pretty well known here is Shopify, for example. That is a system within the technology stack because it supports the end-to-end customer journey. Then you have the data stack, and I'll get back to that a little bit as well. That is not, as we say, mission critical, right? So it is very important to get insights, but if that would be down for an hour, that is okay. If your checkout in the technology stack is down for an hour, that is not okay. So that's why there's differentiation there. And then you have the tool stack, which is sort of loosely coupled systems, like your email system or your HR system. Again, if that is not working for a day, that's very inconvenient, but you can still serve customers when your email is not working. So as I mentioned, the technology stack is the sum of all your software, and building a technology stack is a bit like building a house. It consists of a digital architecture, and we'll go through in a few different patterns for this architecture as well. And these patterns have been proven, and I think it's good to share those, that you can help make decisions based on that, based on the 6 factors I gave you, right? So if your team is not mature, don't go full the most complex one that gives you the most flexibility, because probably flexibility is not what you need now. You first need to ramp up the maturity. Otherwise, you're never going to be successful either. If you visualize that, it looks a bit like this. So on the top layer, you have the marketing layer. Some familiar abbreviations there, probably like CRM or CDP. So CRM is your customer relationship management. CDP is a customer data platform. Your analytics is in there as well. Loyalty systems. So it's a bit of a puzzle, basically, right? So you have all these different systems that you need. You decide what you need at this stage, and then you make a from-to statement, basically. And you connect all these different systems, and you put them in a certain layer. So the marketing layer, the commerce layer, the service layer, integrations and operations. And then on the right side, you see what I just mentioned is the data stack. So that basically extracts, transforms, and loads the data from all the systems in your technology stack. And that it does that via an integrations platform. So at a high level, that's sort of the structure. And to explain a bit further, we break it up in 3 different segments. So if you look at the technology stack, it has a few components. As I just mentioned, you have a layer, which is a grouping of multiple systems with a single responsibility. So for example, the marketing layer is obviously connected to your marketing team. So marketing team has certain requirements, and therefore the owner or the digital leader of that technology stack needs to provide that team with the best software to do their job. Same goes for the commerce layer or the operations layer. And then within one of those layers, you have a system, which is a single standalone application. Like, for example, in the commerce layer, you have a system called Shopify. And then a small component within a certain system is what we call a tool. So as an example, a system like Shopify is a commerce platform. And what a commerce platform basically does, it brings product data together with customer data. And then what comes out is order data. And that is the core of what a commerce platform does. But at some stage, when the business complexity grows, the requirements for a specific part of that system also grow, right? So if you become bigger, so for example, your catalog grows from 1,000 products to 50,000 products, probably at some stage, the product information management functionality or feature within the commerce platform is not good enough anymore. And then what happens? Basically, a tool from a feature pops out and becomes its own system. To visualize that, I made it visual in this overview. So as I mentioned, Shopify is a commerce platform that has product management functionality in it, but it's not a PIM system by itself. So a product information management system. These are all considerations that you need to make, and that's also where often we get involved, is to help make or put the pieces of this puzzle together, right? Is my organization ready for a PIM, yes or no, at this stage, right? So it might be that the catalog says, yeah, we really need it, but either there's a budget constraint, or the maturity organization is just not there, or the technical leadership is not in place. So therefore, if the system would be implemented in the correct way, there's no real way to manage it and to own it, basically. So that's why we break it up into these different things, because this helps non-technical or non-digital people to understand what are the things, what is the software within our company and where are basically the problems. So when we do a technology audit, this is basically the first thing that we do. We create a from to statement. So that visual you saw in the beginning from the chaos, right? So all these different systems, people don't really have an idea what their IT landscape looks like. That's another word for technology stack. They don't really know where the problem is. They just know it doesn't work, or you have unhappy customers, or you have unhappy employees within your teams. So our goal is then often to map this out to understand how your business works, then create an overview of all the different systems in your IT landscape, and then map a from to statement. And then you put that on a roadmap, basically. So you say, okay, this is where we are now. This is where we want to be in 12 months. The next slide shows many of the abbreviations. I won't go through them in detail, but as I said, I'll share the slide so you can look at that later. So then a very important part, and that's also something we often support in, is the software selection. So how do you decide what software to buy or to build? And therefore, maybe it's required to have an in-house development team or you outsource that. That's a second question. The first question is how to actually decide what to buy or build. So selecting systems in your technology stack. And something that we've learned the hard way is that it's basically the best way to make the best use of technology. It's a sort of a game to avoid being unique. So do you really want to be unique in your inventory replenishment processes? If you ask me, no, right? You want to be unique in the things that are specific to your brand or specific to the category of products that you're setting. But being unique in these best practices doesn't make much sense if you ask me. So please learn from past mistakes from other people like ourselves and then adopt those things. So what that means is when you're small, bend your processes to your systems. So therefore you buy them. And when you become larger, you can start bending the systems to your processes, which requires custom development. If you start off with everything built custom, you're not utilizing many of the mistakes that other people have made and the best practices that have been laid down by these specific software systems, right? So how a certain website or a certain commerce platform works 15 years ago, you might have needed to build things like subscriptions, for example. But there's so much new software that you can actually buy, you don't have to build it. So how do you decide? We see three categories. There's things that are of strategic value, of core value, and of utility value. Strategic value, you always buy, you always build and you never buy, right? But that needs to have a strategic business value to your company. So without this strategic technology, your business could basically not exist. And an example for that is within Uber. So Uber is a very technology-driven company, but in fact, they just sell taxi rides, right? So the engine that connects riders to drivers, that is a very strategic thing that makes a lot of value, that drives a lot of value to Uber. It's not something you just buy from the shelf, especially not when they started. So then core value, you buy and you extend to fit. So this directly impacts business results via experience or the operation. So it's still very important to your company, but you either buy that via an API or from a microservice or from a completely packaged piece of software. And an example of that is that the seamless payments in the app of Uber, right? So yes, there's a lot of customization around it, but Uber doesn't have their own PSP, payment service provider. They still use one of the big ones. Adyen, Stripe, Molly, like there's multiple options out there. So you extend to fit basically. And then there's things of utility value, right? No technology company, even one that has 1,000 software engineers, they're never going to build their own dashboarding software or their own finance or HR software, right? So it's necessary to run the business. There's no real differentiation in it for you. So always buy, and if needed, some minimal extending, but that's the utility value of technology. And I think that's also important to point out is that when you're small, there's more in the last category, obviously, in the utility value category. And when you grow, you potentially can move more into the strategic value category. So how to actually build and compile that technology stack? I'd like to bring it back to Conway's Law. And there's always a lot of discussion around headless, yes or no. And headless basically means you disconnect your front end from your back end and you put an API layer in between. And it also means moving from a monolithic architecture to a more modular one. And this is a pretty technical topic, so I won't go into too much detail around it. But one of the most important things to move from a monolith to a more modular setup is not so much the technology itself, but it's mainly the organizational setup that needs to build and support it, right? So when you have one co-located large team, that often gears towards a monolithic architecture. When you have more smaller distributed teams, then it's more likely to create a modular structure. High level, there's sort of three directions that you can go for, and this connects to the phases of the company that you're in. I can't say as clear cut as a commerce-led, so option number one is for stage number one and stage number two. It differs per company, but at a high level, when you're small, please go for the first one, right? So especially a lot of the software in this category, so the monolithic category, it really got a lot more advanced in the past years. So for example, there always used to be a problem in your CMS. So in editing and creating new pages for your site, and that's the next section I'll go through. It used to be a lot of limitations there. So commerce platforms or commerce software were very good at making commerce-driven pages like the checkout or your product detail page or your product listing page. But if you wanted to add a very rich blog with a lot of content requirements, then it sort of got into problems. Luckily, now we're in a different state, and I think there's a lot you can do with monolithic setups, and there's no bad thing about it. Sometimes it gets sort of a how do you say, a bad reputation, but that's not true anymore. I think there's a lot of opportunity, especially when you need speed to market at a low complexity with some standard journeys. So one of the reasons to transition to a more expert-led structure is that if there are specific journeys, for example, if there is specific dedicated pieces of data that you need to add in the checkout, for example, well, that could lead to the monolithic system not providing enough technical flexibility to make that adjustment, for example, right? But there's many other different reasons to that as well. So if you want to go beyond the product catalog with a lot of customer requirements, a lot of custom journeys like made to order products and subscriptions, and there could be a lot of complexity that you basically need from the business side, that could be a reason to move to that commerce-led approach. And that means going to a more composable architecture. And I'll show you a visual of that in a bit as well. And then the last option, but that is really for companies that are technology driven by itself, you go full modular basically. So there is a API first strategy, which basically provides full technical flexibility to all the business complexity that you get, right? So, but I would say that's only for companies that are north of 100 or 150 million, because then technology really becomes a differentiator for them. And that's also what you see in the percentages at the bottom, right? So when you enter that third option or that last phase, there's a lot more in the strategic value bucket and less in the core or utility bucket. And as you see in the first example, the majority, almost everything is in the utility bucket. So yeah, as I said in the beginning, it really helps to limit your business complexity, and then therefore aligning your business processes with the technical capabilities that your technology stack provides to you. So if you visualize that, it's a bit of a complex visual, but I'll talk you through it. A monolithic setup is often, it looks a bit like this, and what it basically means is that all these different blocks of features that you need on the back end, so for example, your customer data, your product management functionality, your search, your checkout, all these different pieces of functionality, they're brought together in one, what they call a monolithic commerce platform, like Shopify, for example. And as I said, that is basically this first option, right? So the commerce-led approach. And it's not a negative thing, because systems like this, they have provided you a lot more flexibility in past years. Often there was already a problem in bringing those commerce and marketing different pages together, but now there's a lot more possibilities there already. Then later, if you transition to those new phases, your business complexity increases. You also need more technical flexibility, and you need more features than that the monolithic system will provide to you. Then you transition to a composable architecture, or composable commerce is sort of the new buzzword there. Or headless is also often used, but composable goes a bit further, because it's not just flexibility and composability on the front end, it is also composability on the back end. So for example, search, Algolia is a specific dedicated microservice to search, which is great. It provides you with a lot more flexibility and more features. However, that comes at a cost in terms of complexity. Your team needs to be able to service it. It's a bigger investment to keep up and running as well. It is more investment to further develop. So there's a lot of positives, but there's also things to things to keep in mind, right? So it's not just about the flexibility. It's also, can your organization, take that into account, basically. So if you want to read more about this specific topic, you can always visit the MAC Alliance. They have a lot of good information around this, and it's basically an organization that brings a lot of the companies that support this vision of composability together. So to summarize, the principle here is to first buy and then extend before you custom build, right? So that buying and extending gives you a lot more flexibility at a lower cost, but that does mean you need to bring back sometimes you need to bring back your scope, or you need to simplify your processes. And yeah, that's always a balancing act. And the great job of a product manager is basically to balance that out, to balance out the business requirements, what is feasible for your technical roadmap and your technology stack. So then the final part is on the front end. So that's actually the thing you can actually see. And we are big advocates of making that composable as well. So not to rebuild everything from scratch, but to provide your commercial teams with the right CMS, so the content management system, but also the digital Lego blocks to create pages themselves. So what defines a modern digital experience, right? So it's basically the website. So the website, if it turns into a full experience, it covers a lot more than just buying something online or just a blog, right? It provides a rich content experience, and that requires quite a lot of software. So how we often look at it is based on these 4 key components. So and these 4 things are actually the only things you can really see. So one of the key benefits of a composable frontend is that you can move a lot faster without any dependencies on your design team in terms of UX and UI design, and also not on your development team. So to build out the pages that you actually need. The master data is what is stored within your technology stack. So for example, from your commerce platform. CMS is the final component. That is the thing that you use as a non-technical user to build and compile pages. And that's what I'll explain in this part a bit further. So our advice is always build a system and not just a website. So don't design and build a website, but create a library of reusable components. And these reusable components are basically a bit like digital Lego blocks. So they provide some design constraints, but they guarantee your corporate identity, visual identity, for example. But it enables your marketing team to publish content a lot faster, and therefore this opens up budget for content creation that doesn't have to be spent on software engineering or on design, because you basically take one of the Lego blocks from your library, you compile the page, and you add the content. That's sort of high level the process. How that looks, this is just an example of a homepage where you see 3 products. UX is basically how it works. So it's defined the page layout. So that says sign in link on top right, logo top left, navigation in the middle, 3-column setup in this case. So that's the UX of it. So how it works. UI is often how it looks, right? So it's basically this purple color because that is part of your visual identity. You could strip this page of the UI in terms of all the visual aspects, and then you have something called a wireframe, which still defines the UX. But if you add the layer of branding, you basically get the UX combined with the UI. Then you have the content, and those are all the things that are displayed within that grid of UX and UI. And those are the things you can actually change with your CMS, right? So in your CMS, visually, you would select this specific component, you drag it on the page, then you select the second component, you drag it on the page, and you edit all the content. And the content is either visuals and text. You can't change the design itself, so you can't change the UX or the UI. The only thing you can change is the content. So the CMS enables you to manage the content and compile pages on your website. And all these pages together bring a digital experience. Final part is the master data. The master data exists of product, customer, and order data together. And that data comes from one of your systems, probably from your commerce platform. If you have a PIM, so a product information system, it potentially comes from there. But it's not something you change on a daily basis. It is something that is extracted from all the systems in your technology stack. And you don't want to edit your catalog continuously. So all your product data is stored as master data in your commerce platform. So for example, if you want to change the title of one of these categories, you do that in your commerce platform. And as I already mentioned, you compile a page of these different components. So for example, the hero banner we just discussed, and then you would select a category preview, and an incentives thing, and then footer, and you can actually move these blocks around as well. And approaching a digital experience in this way, it makes you a lot faster without any dependencies. So therefore, that opens up budget to do other things, and it also enables technical people to work on actual technical stuff and not reiterate endlessly on the same page. So it has a lot of benefits, and those are listed out here. And this drag and drop CMS is something that a lot of monolithic but also more composable systems they now offer in their feature stack. So you can actually have multiple components, multiple versions of a specific component, right? So this you would have a category preview, one with 3 products, one with 4 products, one with 2 products. So there's all these different variations basically. And if you bring together all these different pages with these different reusable components, all that together makes up your digital experience, right? So your product listing page, your PDP, your product detail page, a cart, a checkout, these are all built up from these digital Lego blocks, and everything together is what we call a digital experience. So third principle for the front end, don't build a single website, but actually invest in a reusable system or a reusable library of components. That's almost it. Coming to the conclusion. So just summarizing in a few principles and guidelines. I hope I got across that technology, the goal of technology is to provide business value and therefore be the infrastructure for your growth ambitions. In essence, all that software does is automate a specific process. So when implementing or building process, understand how your business works first. A great way to do that is to map those processes in different events. And based on those processes, you actually set up the requirements that do make you unique, right? So there are maybe specific things that fit in that either core or strategic value column. And there's no real way to simplify that, then those need to be implemented or built. So if you decide on to buy software, that means adopting the process. And if you build software, you can actually dictate the process. And that also means that, again, IT or software always gets the blame, but often the problem is not in the software. Your processes or people are just not aligned with how the software works. So it's just a different way of thinking about it. And the goal of the digital leader or product manager is basically to balance this business complexity with the technical flexibility in compiling and setting up this technology stack. So to summarize, simplify processes over implementing complexity. If there's an opportunity to do that, always choose that one. Software selection, first buy and extend before you build. That's also to keep things simple and also to prevent legacy further down the line. In terms of the front end, don't build a single website, but invest in a reusable system of components, because further down the line, that will always help you in a better way. That's it. So feel free to get in touch if you needed some independent advice on either the technology stack or any other software that's giving you pain, then we're here to help. Let me just check if there are some specific questions that came in. No, not yet. All right. Well, thanks a lot, and hope to see you next time again. Bye-bye.